Today, we're diving into one of history's great paradoxes, how an alliance created to guarantee freedom can somehow turn into the very opposite. And we're going to use the words of the ancient historians themselves to track how the Greek struggle for liberty against Persia slowly, piece by piece, forged the chains of the Athenian Empire.
I mean, think about that for a second. How does that even happen? In 479 BC, the Greek city-states had just pulled off a miracle, beating back this massive Persian invasion. They were united, and to make sure it never happened again, they formed a mutual defense pact, the Delian League. But get this, in just 50 years, that League of Equals was gone. In its place was an Athenian empire, and its members weren't partners anymore. They were subjects. So, what went wrong?
All right, so let's set the scene. We're in the immediate aftermath of the Persian Wars. The biggest threat has been pushed back, sure, but they aren't gone for good. The Greeks know they need a permanent alliance to keep up the fight. And the natural leader, you'd think, was Sparta. But that leadership, well, it didn't last long at all.
And man, the difference in leadership was just night and day. On one hand, you have the Spartan commander Pausanias. According to the historian Thucydides, this guy was a total disaster. Arrogant, harsh, just plain abusive. The allies couldn't stand him. And then you have Aristides the Athenian. Diodorus tells us this guy was so respected, so famous for his fairness, that the allies pretty much begged Athens to take over. So the League's first big power shift didn't happen because of force. It happened because of character.
Okay, so what was the whole point of this new league anyway? Thucydides lays out the official mission statement, and it's pretty clear. It wasn't just about defense. It was about revenge. The goal was to go on the offense, hit Persian territory, and make them pay for all the damage they'd done. On the surface, it's a really clear, unifying mission, right? Sounds pretty noble.
And, at the start, the whole thing was set up to be super fair. This was supposed to be a voluntary club of equals. The shared treasury wasn't even in Athens. It was on the sacred, neutral island of Delos. And members had a choice. You could provide your own ships and men. Or, if that was too much trouble, you could just contribute cash. Aristotle even tells us they had this really powerful ceremony. They sank these big lumps of iron into the sea, swearing the alliance would last until that iron floated back up. In other words, forever. Athens was the leader, the hegemon, but it was supposed to be the first among equals.
And for a little while, it all worked out great. The league was incredibly successful. They kept pushing the Persians back. But here's the irony. Their very success is exactly what started to poison the well. The relationship began to change. And pretty soon, the first cracks started to show.
So, the first big test case. It comes from the island of Naxos. Now, Naxos was a big deal, a major naval power in the League. But they felt like the Persian threat was basically over. So they decided they wanted out of this voluntary alliance. This put Athens in a tough spot. Do they honor the spirit of the League and let them walk? Or do they force them to stay?
Well, Athens made its choice, and it wasn't a peaceful one. They laid siege to Naxos and forced them back into the League. Thucydides, our main source for this whole story, he points to this moment and says, this is where everything changed. It was the first time the League's army was used not against Persia, but against one of its own members. The whole idea of a voluntary alliance was officially dead.
Now, at the same time, something else is going on. Something a little more subtle, but absolutely crucial. Remember that choice members had? Provide ships or provide money? Well, most of them found that going on military campaigns all the time was a real hassle. It was just way easier to pay the cash tribute and let Athens handle the fighting. It looked like a win-win.
But, as Thucydides points out, this convenience had a hidden, fatal cost. All that allied money was making the Athenian navy unbelievably powerful, and at the same time, the allies were letting their own armies and navies just fall apart. Think about it. They were literally paying Athens to disarm them. So later, when they wanted to stand up for themselves, they realized they couldn't. They had no ships, no experience, nothing.
Okay, so Naxos showed that Athens would use force to keep you in the club. But the incident with Thassos, whoa, that showed something much, much darker. This wasn't about Thassos trying to leave the League. This was a private squabble between Athens and Thassos over who got to control some really rich gold mines. And Athens used the entire League fleet to crush Thassos and take the mines for itself. This wasn't about protecting Greece anymore. Not even close. This was Athens using the League's muscle to line its own pockets.
So you can see how the stage is being set, right? These early rebellions really laid the groundwork. And then a guy named Pericles comes onto the scene in Athens, and this whole transformation from an alliance into a full-blown empire, well, it just gets kicked into overdrive.
A couple of things happen really fast that just pour fuel on the fire. In 461, Pericles takes charge. Then, in 454, after a bad military loss in Egypt, Athens uses that as an excuse to do something huge. They move the entire League treasury from the neutral island of Delos to Athens. And then comes the real kicker. In 449, Athens signs an official peace treaty with Persia. The war is over.
But here's the thing. Even with the war over, the money, it didn't stop flowing into Athens. So what did Athens do with all that cash? As Plutarch tells us, they used it to fund the most magnificent building program the world had ever seen, creating wonders like the Parthenon on the Acropolis. The Allies had to watch as the money they paid for defense was used to beautify the city that was now their master. For them, it was a slap in the face. It was open tyranny.
Which, of course, leads to the big, obvious question. If the war with Persia is officially over, why does the Delian League even exist anymore? Why are they still collecting all this money? And the answer is brutally simple. It wasn't an alliance anymore. It was an empire. And empires don't just fade away. They have to be maintained by force.
So, how did they pull it off? How did one city control over 150 others, spread all across the Aegean Sea? Well, they didn't just use brute force. They built this really sophisticated system of political, economic, and legal control to keep everyone in line.
And the amazing thing is, we don't have to guess how this worked. We have literal stone inscriptions that have survived for 2,500 years, and they spell it all out for us.
First up, there's something called the Chalcis Decree. After putting down a rebellion, Athens made the people of Chalcis swear an oath of obedience, not to the League, but directly to Athens. And here's the clincher. All their most important legal cases, the ones that could result in death or exile, had to be tried in Athenian courts. I mean, that's it. Your independence is gone. You've completely surrendered your sovereignty.
Okay, so that's political control. What about the money? The coinage decree banned all the Allied states from minting their own silver coins. Basically, they forced everyone to stop making their own local money and use Athenian currency instead, those famous silver owls. It also forced everyone to use Athenian weights and measures for trade. This was a straight-up power move for economic dominance.
And in the end, it always comes back to the money, doesn't it? That original tribute was set at 460 talents. By the time the big war with Sparta kicked off, it was up to 600. But then, by 425, look at that jump. It skyrockets to almost 1,500 talents. I mean, that's insane. This was no longer about defense. This was the price you paid for being a subject of Athens.
Now, you can probably guess that this whole transformation from freedom-fighting alliance to oppressive empire, it didn't exactly fly under the radar. Across the water, Sparta and its own alliance, the Peloponnesian League, were watching all this happen with, growing panic. A major conflict felt like it was just a matter of time.
And in those last few years before the big war breaks out, Athens starts using its imperial power to directly poke at Sparta's allies. They interfere in a fight involving Corinth, a key Spartan ally. They besiege another city connected to Corinth. And then they drop the hammer with the Megarian Decree, a crippling economic embargo against Megara, one of Sparta's oldest friends. These were the final provocations, and it's what finally kicked off a war that would last for nearly 30 years.
So, what was Athens' excuse for all of this? How did they justify it? Well, Thucydides gives us the answer in a chilling speech from some Athenian diplomats. They basically said, look, justice is a word that people who are equally powerful use with each other. When one side is strong and the other is weak, the strong do whatever they want and the weak just have to put up with it. The very alliance created to protect freedom now operated on the principle that might makes right.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The story of the Athenian Empire is a serious cautionary tale. Athens had its reasons. They tell you every step they took was about security, about survival in a dangerous world. But their subjects, they called it slavery. Which leaves us with a really tough, timeless question, one that's just as relevant today. Where exactly is the line between a nation protecting its own interests and it becoming a tyrant to everyone else?